Hello everyone, friends. You are once again guests at the Armenian Woman's Place, and on our channel we've gathered an international, delicious and friendly family, which I congratulate all of us on. Today we have this kind of pastry. It's all very easy and quick to make. I'd even say it's elementary. All the ingredients are always in the fridge. Everything is very accessible. In short, this is the kind of recipe every homemaker should have. We're making custard and it still needs time to cool down. Put 400 milliliters of milk on the stove and bring it to a boil. In a separate bowl, mix 2 eggs. You can also use 3 yolks. Most of my recipes use 3 yolks, but you can also use 2 whole eggs. Add a cup of sugar here, but first beat the eggs a little. Add 3 tablespoons here as well of starch. Don't forget to add some vanilla and a pinch of salt as well. Once everything is mixed, add about 100 milliliters of milk directly from here. It can be at any temperature. Just if the temperature is too high, add it little by little. This way our mixture will become liquid and it will be possible to pour it into the milk in a thin stream. The milk has come to a boil, so reduce the heat to the lowest setting and slowly pour in the egg yolk mixture, in our case, the egg mixture, in a thin stream. At the same time, keep stirring constantly, all the way until it's fully cooked. After adding the egg mixture, set the heat to medium, just a bit below average. And start cooking. As soon as you see the first steady bubbles, that means our cream is ready. During the process, it might seem like the cream has turned lumpy. But if you've done everything right, rest assured that once the mixture thickens, just whisk it a little and it will become smooth and uniform. Add the butter directly into the hot mixture. By the way, I have 150 grams of butter here. You can use less if you want. Say 100 grams. But just keep in mind that it's not really recommended to add butter to a very hot mixture because it affects the tenderness and texture of the cream after it sets. So we wait a few minutes and add it when the mixture is still hot but not too hot. I transfer it to another container just so it cools down faster. And I cover it with plastic wrap. Make sure it's in direct contact. First, let's prepare the baking sheet because this kind of dough doesn't like to wait at the end. My baking sheet is 30 by 40 centimeters, but if you use this size, the pastry won't turn out very tall. I like this height, and I don't really worry about it when I'm making it for everyday tea. But if you want to get slightly taller layers, then use a smaller pan. Today, to make the pastry look a bit more impressive, I'll use a slightly smaller pan. Let's get started on the dough. For this, we'll need 4 eggs. If they're large, use 3. Mine are 50 grams each without the shell. Also, a cup of sugar. The cup holds 250 milliliters. 70 grams of vegetable oil. A pinch of salt, vanilla, also a teaspoon of baking soda, and 1.5 tablespoons of cocoa. As for the flour, I'll talk about that in detail during the process. Also 1.5 cups of fermented dairy products of the same size. Friends, it can be matsoni, kefir, milk, or plain yogurt. Or you can even mix them all together. The main thing is that the total volume is 1.5 cups. You can also replace part of it with milk. But in that case, you'll need to add a little baking powder in addition to the baking soda. As always, if this kind of butter includes. When it comes to fermented dairy products and dairy products in general, I prefer to heat them up on the stove until they reach a temperature where, if you test it with your finger, it feels comfortable. There's no sensation of cold. In other words, it should be close to body temperature. You should never bring it to a boil. So I've started. We beat the eggs with sugar. The sugar doesn't need to dissolve completely. We just want to get a slightly fluffy, pale mixture. I won't need the mixer anymore, but if you continue to use it, keep in mind that after adding the remaining ingredients, you should beat on low speed and not for too long. Now, in go the fermented dairy products and vegetable oil. Add the dry ingredients starting with a cup of flour. To 1 part, add 1.5 tablespoons of cocoa powder. And to the white part, add a bit more than you did with the cocoa, so 2 to 2.5 tablespoons. I divided the batter by weight, so there was an equal amount of batter in each part. As you noticed, I added less cocoa than flour because cocoa always absorbs more liquid than flour. Now spread the batter on the baking sheet and put it in a preheated oven. The temperature should be around 190 degrees Celsius with top and bottom heat, no convection. You don't need to let the baking sheet cool before making the second cake layer. I use the baking sheet again because it has a silicone coating. This allows us to do that. Cover the cake layers. This was passed down to me from my grandmother. I do this so they don't dry out. Everything I bake, I always cover with a towel at the end and leave them like that until they cool down. After they have cooled, trim off all the excess from the edges, then turn those trimmings into crumbs for decoration. Since our cake layers are different colors, we end up with 2 types of sprinkles for decorating. You can make checkerboard patterns or simply alternate straight lines. Do whatever is convenient for you, it always looks beautiful. But since I have a habit of saving and freezing all the trimmings whenever I make different sponge cakes, today I'll use chocolate sponge cake trimmings to decorate this sponge cake. That is, I'll be using some of the trimmings from another sponge cake. If you don't have a blender on hand, you can use a regular grater. The layers of this pastry are very soaked and moist. That's why you can serve it right after adding the cream. But as always, I'm going to wait. I'll serve it in the morning to show the real result in natural light. Well, friends, I think I've delivered on everything I promised at the beginning. Everything is easy, simple, and accessible, just like all of us. And now, an important note. I told you that you can use any fermented dairy products, you can make a mix, and you can even replace half the amount with milk. But when it comes to milk, since there is less acidity in the batter, you need to replace some of the baking soda with baking powder, because this amount of soda requires a certain level of acidity. If there is less acidity, then replace some of it with baking powder, since it is already a self-sufficient product and doesn't require acidity. Also, since all dairy products have different fat content and thickness, and because I don't know which products you are using to achieve the right consistency, I recommend that you don't add the first cup of flour all at once. Leave out about 2 tablespoons. Then, as needed, you can add the remaining flour to each portion to achieve the right consistency. This way, you'll never go wrong.